IVM.
Welcome to another episode of This Round is on Me. The guest on my show today runs what began as a secret supper club and is now one of India's leading experiential marketing and brand strategy agencies. Shreya Soni and her team have curated the most beautiful and immersive campaigns for some of the top homegrown and international brands from a range of industries, but with a bent towards the hospitality industry. With the spate of homegrown brands being launched during COVID, I decided to invite Shreya to share her playbook and pick her brains on how we can stand out from the crowd. Shreya, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thanks, Kari. I'm so excited to be here.
So let's dive right into the subject of branding. You launched a secret supper club in Delhi, much to everyone's skepticism of how well it would do. And, to be honest, we had a very similar experience when it came to Magazine Street Kitchen, which is really in the middle of nowhere and was also, a first of its kind space. So in your experience, of working with brands, do you feel that it's necessary to find a gap in the market to be successful like you did? Or does the angle of it's there, but I can do it better also work?
It could go both ways, quite frankly. And I've seen both options being explored and solutions have been executed quite well and sometimes also quite poorly via both the strategies. I don't think the logic of building a solution after you identify a gap in the market is a short kind of, quite frankly, I don't know, I hope it doesn't sound too jaded, but I quite frankly feel there are only limited set of ideas that are doing its kind of churns and cycles every few decades across regions, and economies. What I feel sometimes does work is when you personalize that solution. So quite frankly, and I'll give you a random example. Let's talk about Alio Olio, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, after a point, the recipe is fairly simple and it's, you could try do it 100 ways, but at the end of the day, if you don't have your signature touch on it, which is not going to catch the fancy of some diner who are going to come back and thereby become a repeat paying customer, it wasn't like they, invented the wheel. You're just kind of working off an existing idea and personalizing it. And it's almost like adding your personal handwriting to the solution. So I feel either way could go, quite frankly.
Yeah, I was curious to know what you thought, but I completely agree with you because we've done both things. Like I said, I mentioned Mag Street Kitchen as an analogy to the Secret Supper Club as being sort of something very new and, edgy for its time. But then we also just launched a pizza delivery brand, which I'm pretty sure isn't the first or the 100th of its kind. So, and why did we do that, right? There's so many out there, why pizza? And it's that thing of, I feel like there's something, I can do better and I can put my sort of spin on it.
Exactly.
And, that's what you have to do. So you're right, it can be either or, but I think that, again, it has to have the right, you really have to have the right, I wouldn't say it's passion, but intention maybe behind what you're doing. So, it's a genuine belief in doing, whether it's a gap that you're filling or whether it's something that's been done 100 times.
Absolutely.
Before.
And quite frankly, see, were we the first supper club? Quite frankly, no. I mean, I've been to some really glorious ones across Europe when I was
but in Delhi, at least in Delhi, yeah.
But I think why we may have been a slight outlier is because the way we executed it. At that point in time, say in 2012, 2013, the gap in the market was the need for a secret supper club. Quite frankly, the need was a legitimate platform where like-minded people who are not part of the same club come together to have an interesting conversation. What I was hearing weekend on weekend was about how people were bored with the mundane. People were doing the same things every weekend and not getting the opportunity for banter without agenda. So for me, it was, okay, what is the best way to break ice is actually breaking bread. And that's something that comes like, very naturally in my family. Now, the reason why it was done secret at that point in time, the chatter was so large around you need a face to drive a product or a service. And to me, I feel like at some point it should become, it should be irrelevant or irrespective of who's running it, as long as the product sticks to your consumer pool. So it was almost as if to offer a counter and say, well, should it matter? Like, can we actually extend it to the end of the spectrum and run it anonymously? And I was quite frankly living out my Nancy Drew and hard, like, imagination and just saying that, does it work? I mean, let's test it out. That's it. And then it stuck.
I was going to ask you this sort of anyway. You work with a lot of F&B brands, for example, and now more than ever, a lot of, for example, restaurants are chef driven. That face does count for something. It does matter. It's it's the face of the brand. It's what people sort of come for. And I've seen it sort of both ways, where sometimes that can backfire. Sometimes it really works in your favor. So, I mean, I know you sort of, may have had a different intention with the Secret Supper Club, where it was really about people getting together and, not about you sort of being the person behind this. But how do you balance that sort of person over product equation when you work with brands where, that face is very much
I agree.
Yeah.
See, I feel sometimes the reason why you need to have a face to a product or a person is also it instills some form of trust. And quite frankly, trust is the one kind of like key binding factor in that route to market strategy, right? So the reason why someone may, purchase a certain tonic water or go to a cafe over like the neighboring cafe is maybe because they know someone, the people who's, behind that product. And I feel that kind of drives affinity. Yes. So I completely agree. Trust, affinity, familiarity. These are all trust building kind of like cues to your customer. But once you kind of like strip that apart, at the end of the day, if your core product isn't strong enough, then how long would the customer keep kind of parting with their cash, maintain affinity, loyalty, etc.? So I think after a point, yes, there is a sense of warmth and familiarity that a chef or a founder may kind of offer to a product. But I don't think my current laptop, has been bought because of affinity towards the leader. I think it's more because of the core product or kind of like what value addition is it really truly building to my life. Yeah. And I wonder if like after a point, I think like that drives certain consumer purchase behavioral kind of like decisions. But at the end of the day, it comes down to flavor. It comes down to taste. It comes down to value addition. It comes down to like price sometimes,
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. And I think that at the end of the day, I've always said this, it's product, no matter how beautifully you package it or how much you scream about it, the product has to speak for itself at the end of the day. So, speaking of like sort of packaging a product, from my experience of launching a host of F&B brands, defining that brand story and the brand values begins right from the design and packaging stage. Of course, even product is created, but well before a product is ever introduced to the market, right? So at what point do you get involved with brands, or should I ask, at what point should a brand involve you, assuming it's not an established brand?
Typically speaking, really tricky one, because any agency will tell you that they would like to be part of the process way before that they're finally kind of roped in. And I say that because more often than not, a PR agency or a marketing agency or, any kind of like the agencies that brands get on board, they get them on board when they hit a problem statement. And then you're asked to build, a range of solutions to address that problem statement. We've also been lucky where brands have gotten us board during that kind of like core idea seeding or kind of like, how do you identify your target audience? I personally believe you may be one of the very many brands in the same segment. But quite frankly, more of, unless you're like a large scale FMCG kind of like a brand, don't gun for the same audience. You can slice and dice the data to find your target unique audience, which is going to respond to certain parameters that are built into your product. So we've also had the kind of like the experience where we've had to get into customer segmentation and then build a route to market or a marketing strategy for brands on that data, as opposed to operating from, here's my problem statement, now give me a solution. That also happens more often than not, Gauri. I'll be honest, like 60% of the times we're brought in when a brand approaches either a plateau or when they're extremely new to a market or they're new to India and they want to understand the local kind of like behavioral patterns.
Right.
So we're given a fairly tight mandate. It's only the real 4 cases where the chew is, delightful and meaty and all of that, where, you can get into building your problem statement alongside the brand, which more often than not involves understanding who your audience is and quite what are their needs and wants. So thereby, how can we tailor make the communication and the strategies or whatever it is to build that bridge closer to your audience and keep lessening that gap?
So what you're saying is that it's ideal if you can be involved from that conceptualization stage, but of course that doesn't always happen. So
yeah. I mean, it's like my dream. It's like one of those quiet points, but more often than not, we're brought in a little bit later in the stage.
Yeah. But it's interesting. I mean, that's the kind of what I want to, bring out here is that if a brand that is starting from scratch, you're setting something up, then it might be worth considering bringing in your sort of the branding, the strategy very much, and how you're planning to like go to market, bringing in you guys, sort of an agency like you guys right up front so that you can actually identify that market clearly, before you figure out how to go out to them.
Yeah, and see, personally, I always feel that kind of like more often than not, if you're a smaller brand or you're a new brand entering an extremely populated, noisy market, more often than not, those teams are scrunched where you're kind of doing everything that is required to hit shelves or open your doors, right, to your consumers. So right from accounting to packaging to design to social media to footfall to revenue, basically the entire gamut.
Absolutely.
Whereas I feel whatever stage or role you kind of like possess in the organization, it is absolutely impossible to possess that skill set to do everything. So for brands that can afford it, so let's talk about like the really kind of like the, say, top 10 large scale, penetrate, the market penetration is immense. So let's talk about FMCG brands. All of these guys have in-house teams that kind of like spend months and months and months, not just on the product development, but around customer identification. What are their needs? Figure out like product testing, work on A/B kind of testing, scenario testing, all of that before they launch. Companies that don't have that bandwidth, I would actually say a good solution could be to even get an agency or a marketing professional on a smaller basis and kind of like probably sense check the plan and work off like on a smaller kind of like assignment before you hit the market. As opposed, because I understand sometimes budget is of constraint. At that stage and point, you're trying to conserve cash and kind of pump it back into, the launch or the product development. But I've just realized that if you are stretched and you don't have that bandwidth or that skill set, sometimes it's better to rope in specialists who kind of can take that off your plate and kind of like co-build that solution with you, as opposed to much later in the game where, then you have to kind of like almost rejig your plan.
Yeah. So it's almost what you're saying, it's worth that investment, just to, hassle later on where you could have got things maybe a little miscalculated. And in fact, I actually want to sort of come to that, because I'm sure you do work with a lot of homegrown sort of startup brands, and I'm sure you get approached by brands wanting you to create magic, but with a limited budget. So, how should a brand look at their marketing up? For instance, how much of a P&L should be allocated to marketing and brand building? I've heard this. I remember once I was listening to a session where someone said that they spent the first few years, of course, this was a big brand, but a big FMCG brand, but they spent the first few years just focused on building the brand. It wasn't about sales. It was just about establishing the brand, So, I mean, of course, that might be an extreme, but how do you kind of advise a brand that is possibly, on a limited budget? We're seeing a lot of that happening right now, right? Where young people are sort of starting out and, catching that entrepreneurial bug. How do you kind of advise them of how to think about this strategy part of it, and then of course going to market?
Yeah, no, that's a really cool question. Also, just to kind of like touch upon that earlier bit that you said about, that patience is required, or maybe the deeper pockets that is required to establish brand equity and value before the cash deals kind of start churning.
Yeah.
I feel that's also quite specific. Also, you kind of seeing that being mirrored in the luxury market. Okay. Where, you kind of like, you take years to establish that brand value, brand equity, kind of like, that kind of like intangible before the tangible start rolling out. And we've kind of seen that, in luxury retail, luxury dining, in fact, where, you kind of like, once you kind of like really establish that you're in for the long haul, and there is a certain kind of like intangible weight that the brand offers, you see consumers adopt that, after kind of like a lengthened time. To address the question about the younger brands, or like, the first kind of like entrepreneurs who are just kicking off, how should they approach, the whole big bad world of marketing? I would actually strip it down to being your primary objective, or your first layer of solution has to be just know your customer better. So you could be across any industry. It could be a beauty brand. You could be, a homegrown alcohol brand. You could be a restaurant. Whatever you do, I feel it's important to understand who are you building the solution for. More often than not, we also hear about this was a personal problem, and thereby you built a solution with the assumption that, you're facing it, your FNF is facing it, thereby, you multiply that by like 100,000x and hope for that kind of like adoption. But quite frankly, there is one thing to agree that, that is a problem, but that may be of varying levels of importance in a lot of lives. So I think sometimes it's important to probably take a little bit longer to, first of all, actually try and understand which customer segment is this for? Walks of life, disposable income, which cities am I looking at? And quite frankly, some of the brands, again, I'm going to go back to New Age FMCG only because that's been my recent experience, and we're working with some of them, is that they're no longer solely at Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore. And I keep telling them, let's expand that. I think, yes, of course, a big bracket of that disposable income sits there. But quite frankly, potential consumers sitting in Kanpur, and they're also sitting in Jaipur, and they're sitting in Indore. And I think the minute you kind of like show an intent of interest towards them, that loyalty sometimes is a quicker turnaround in those cities. So my first step would be, or my first kind of like big piece of advice would be, know who your customer is and remove those kind of like, those barriers that we've all built in, that they're usually sitting
the cliches,
in these, quite frankly, they're sitting all over, man.
Yeah.
Like, and the more you adopt it, better for you, better for the consumer, better for your product. And the second step would be, just being cognizant of current times. The last 14 months has been an accelerated development and progression in the market, the consumer habit development, and quite frankly, the adoption of it. Like how sometimes says, typically speaking, consumer behavior takes many, many years to kind of like turn a cycle. What's happened is that in the last 14 months, it's been rapidly kind of like that circle and the wheel just turned. We are more dependent on technology and digital media than ever before. And I think we were going in that direction. It's just been heightened and accelerated. And I feel it's important to thereby understand that since the market's changed, the consumers changed, habits have changed, purchase patterns have changed, thereby your solution may also have to kind of like take that within the folds, meaning which that it is important to understand that what your consumer wanted in Jan 2020 mean like top 3 kind of like requirements today. Whereas if we were tracking this in 2018 versus 2019, quite frankly, there are very many overlapping, you can, that chart where, no, it's quite consistent. It doesn't shift as radically. I think the needs have changed quite drastically. And I feel like the biggest, and I may be wrong here, but in my research and understanding, I think solutions that are simple, solutions that are familiar and are comforting, they are finding a greater kind of like stickiness and resonance right now, just that relationship between brands and consumers.
So, you're absolutely right. Sorry, it's just, this is something that we're seeing in F&B as well, exactly this. And on both the points that you mentioned, I feel that, this last year has forced us to think very differently about our customer. And this very point that you made about, looking beyond the major metros and the obvious sort of target audience, I think we have to shed all these ideas of what's obvious now. And, I'll give you an example of what we did, which I kind of accidentally, but it also, it sort of pleasantly surprised me. We have a bakery, Max Street Bread Co. And of course, we've always thought of, hey, it's Bombay, it's the freshest product, it's made to order, all of that. We're like, it doesn't go out of Bombay. We don't have the capability to, extend this beyond Bombay. And recently, long story short, we started supplying the product from Bombay to cities like Surat, Indore, and Pune. And like logistics apart, the product actually got there in the way that we wanted it and tasted as good. And the response was just mind-blowing. And I will be completely honest with you, these were not cities that were anywhere on my radar at any point in the last sort of 5 years since we created the brand. So I've just...
And I'd imagine that'd be hugely exciting to discover.
Incredibly exciting. And it just shows how, like you said earlier, like blinkered we've been in our approach to going to market and completely sort of missing a whole customer base that's out there. So I agree with you. We kind of just by chance, but I think what you're saying is that identifying this upfront and being open-minded about what could be your potential customer base is worth the investment to make, because that just it could really be a game changer for you.
Absolutely.
And, I completely agree with you.
And Gauri, it should sometimes I just feel that brands approach it sometimes as an afterthought, and thereby hurried solutions are kind of like activated in those markets, assuming that, but we've got such great success in Bombay, the laurels and that word of mouth is going to work in probably like Ludhiana. Whereas I feel like we're actually a very exciting country where every 100 kilometers, quite frankly, like how North Delhi operates versus how South Delhi operates is completely different. And I feel it should never be an afterthought, and which is why I said that know your customer and study their needs and wants. And then layer your kind of like solutions over that. But the base of it, quite frankly, remains like the same old stuff that, marketing pundits have been saying for years and decades, which is, first of all, what's your core product? Can you please constantly test it out and remove like any kind of like leakages before the customer tells you? You don't want to hear it from the customer. Work it out internally. And the secondly would be build it and activate it, mirroring the asks and the needs of your target consumer.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that makes complete sense. And I was going to ask you sort of, what do you think companies do wrong when it comes to branding? And I think what you're saying is that if you have a really solid product and you've kind of identified and cleaned it up to be as best as it can be, that's a really good starting point.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things I feel in my experience has been that sometimes when you see the success of one of your peers or another brand within the same segment fly out quite well, one kind of assumes that you could join that wave and you could ride that wave alongside. Whereas I feel more often than not, I haven't seen that kind of like
play
pan out in the same kind of fashion as it was imagined. And one example would be quite specific to, I would say, Delhi, if I may offer that example, would be the concept of gourmet burgers. And what happened was that about like 12, 14, 18 months back, we finally got like a good burger. And then, that became like the new thing everyone wanted to eat, dine in, order in, whatever format you were exploring that product. And thereby that gave birth to a multitude of other kind of like brands hoping to ride that wave out. What happened very soon was that you've kind of like parked that investment in a quality product, in your branding, in your packaging and, digital spends, etc. But quite frankly, not much work was done on the R&D or what distinguishes you from the next available gourmet burger brand. And when you're kind of like lacking in just that core product or that value addition, then unfortunately people will have to go down to, okay, what's cheaper or what's my value for money or what are the add-ons? Or that's when things like founder affinity come in. That, no, you know what, we know like XYZ chef, let's just like all of that. But I just feel that till you don't do your homework and figure out what is, and really explore that personal thumbprint and apply that onto your brand, I'm not quite sure it works in the way of us kind of like hope and imagine that, but that segment is doing really well, let's cash in. And then that you even see in like, say, homegrown gin brands.
Right. I was going to come to that actually. Yeah. No, I mean, I've seen sort of like your portfolio of clients, and especially when you talk about established brands, right? You work with so many gin and whiskey companies or brands. How do you actually differentiate? Yeah. How do you actually differentiate the brands when they're probably all vying for the same audience?
Yeah, no, for sure. In fact, we get
product is one thing, but I mean, obviously everyone thinks they have the best product. So yeah.
I mean, you're absolutely right. More often than not, the mandate is so similar that if you take away the name, you're just like, okay, cool. We just worked on that like 3 months back. But, quite frankly, Gauri, it's like two people. They're never the same. At least that's been my experience. And we take great pride in doing our homework and our research before having a second conversation. So it's our job and it's our homework to tell you, but what differentiates you from the next available brand. And quite frankly, it always exists, whether that's kind of like going back to the origins of the product or your story about why it started, or the product formulation, or the recipe development, or the packaging and design, or the founder stories. There is a rich pool of information that quite frankly, or even like, for example, price, that becomes an interesting kind of like, gentle addition to product differentiation. There are ways to explore. How do you differentiate one gin brand for another? And how do you kind of like differentiate something? Quite frankly, I mean, with gins, you could still play off recipe development and the ingredients that go in. But say, for example, with tonic, after a point, I mean, it's tonic. It's pretty much the same, right? It is like two separate people.
Our friends in the tonic world are not going to be happy. No, but
No,
you know,
for sure,
I
but-
agree with you. I agree with you. But that's the thing, right? That you're vying for the same market. So
No
how?
two sisters are alike, so in my head, I always feel like
But
twins.
hopefully they're
they
not
have
going
such
for the same
separate
guy, or they're
personalities.
not like, they're sort of, there's enough, it is a real issue when it comes to, I mean, it's like for restaurants, right? Like you, of course, different cuisines is a different thing, but when you're talking about like restaurants or even delivery brands, for example, that
Yeah.
are doing the
Yeah.
same sort of the same sort of cuisine, or like, pizza, for example, right?
Yeah.
Like, yes, there's
Yeah.
going to be product differentiation at some point, but you are all vying for the same audience.
Agreed.
And it's a huge challenge then to
May I offer a solution here?
yes, please.
So I agree with what you're saying. After a point, it's pizza, it's tonic, it's XYZ product, right? And after a point, it may also seem like they're overlapping kind of like circles of your customer pool. I think what kind of sets you apart sometimes is also how quickly and how relevantly does your name go out. And that could even happen with creative collaborations. And I often find like collaboration, sometimes, the word gets amplified in, can I give you an example of that? For example, when a chef kind of like collaborates with, quite frankly, even with another chef, and they have like two remote like skill sets, but they're bringing something in, unique to the table. I think that more often than not, that benefits all parties involved because it's an exciting story, to kind of push out. So if you're even gunning for the same audience, sometimes you have to think about how can I get my trusted, legitimate fashion quicker than my neighbor? And I wonder if that sometimes then helps.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, then it's really about the marketing and the storytelling that
Exactly.
Yeah. So what's
Yeah.
been one of your most exciting and successful sort of brand stories?
Oh, wow. We've so many, I want to say. In fact, like each of them has been more than the brand. I feel we end up learning so much. One of them, the recent ones, was when we got to work with the gang at Stranger & Sons. And they were kind of like, launching and establishing themselves in the
Delhi.
kind of North market and exploring that, because there's insane amount of that was already built up around Stranger & Sons. So everyone was already kind of like waiting, okay, when are they finally hitting Delhi, NCR, etc. Now, this was also a point, this was in 2020 where, most people were at home. And no one was venturing out as much. And the problem statement then was that, guys, typically speaking, product launches in the alcobev space are done at a trade outlet, or it's done at a bar where there's more touch and feel. You get to interact with the team.
Right.
So they said, how are you going to do it? Do you want to just move it forward? And we said, nope, we're going to go ahead and provide a solution. So we wanted to basically, the problem statement soon became not Stranger & Sons is launching in your city. The problem statement was, can we offer 50 cherry-picked people the most unlike Zoom? And that was our problem statement. It just so happened that we plugged Stranger & Sons gin into it. And then basically we kind of like applied a mix of like digital marketing and product seeding. And the one kind of like so focused, and thankfully it was a fantastic team. These guys kind of like said, okay, you know
them.
what,
Yeah,
we're going to roll with that vision and let's see it play out. And I think they offered us that flexibility to roll with your key statement not being your product launch, but let's provide people the most unlike Zoom call, because people were like done with Zoom calls, right?
Yeah.
Like all our work was happening and we were just like, hi, Friday, 7:00, you will get 60 minutes. Can you give us 60 minutes once you wound down from work and get on another Zoom call? And we basically programmed it like a musical and a theatrical experience. So everything was, we had a theater artist on board who really kind of like drew out one of the characters behind the gin, who's based in Goa. And that story, we kind of like extended as many touch points that were, kind of like seeded into right from the invitation stage to the digital kind of like storytelling, to the actual like, play out of the brand launch, to even at home, what were the kits that were sent out? These were kits that were sent out from like the garden of Fernando in Goa, etc., etc. Right? Yeah. So quite frankly, the story and the main problem statement, we just flipped it. And then we neatly kind of like inserted the gin at points where it didn't feel forced.
Right.
And for us to see that, at the 60th minute, we said, you know what, thank you. And then we're going to see you soon. No one logged off. They said, no, let's just continue and have the after party. And that's when, the back end team, who was anyways like nervously making sure about timekeeping, etc., we said, tick. That's a good kind of like case study right there.
No, that sounds great. And in fact, I mean, they're a great brand. It's a really fun brand. And, you kind of, I guess, took something that's become, seen as like the bane of everyone's life and made it into something fun. So, But then tell me what's been like one of your most sort of challenging brand stories, and you get brownie points for naming the brand, but I'm kidding. But one where it may not have kind of, it was a sort of struggle for you to do what you want. And the reason I'm asking is, more than the gossip is just for like even brands to understand what not to do, or how to work with an agency if you are going to be spending money on one.
For sure. I mean, I can tell you one which was quite frankly, I think a personal boo-boo. I don't think, I can't imagine most brands, do that. It was a personal kind of like challenge, and we're working on it. So what happened was that, like any brand under the sun, last year, we were very committed on offering whatever help and support and solutions to our existing client base. And we said, you know what, I feel like, these are tricky times, but if you're coming to the Ideas Lab with a problem statement, it is our job to give you an idea. So I think part of that also meant that there was almost like this overcommitment of pulling through whatever solution that was being greenlit. And this I'm talking about June last year, where, there were massive snags in supply chain and courier and logistics. Like basically you can think of everything.
Of the shit show, basically. Yeah.
Exactly. And, someone and I can't say the name because we've signed an,
Bosch.
Right after this, I'll tell you, but I can't say it. And essentially, these guys are like fantastic people, great team. And they've been trusting us like over the last 14 months to roll out back-to-back solutions for them. And they came to us saying that, part of our team is really burnt out. And can we do something which involves an at-home, because you know this, the at-home economy is just, really great adoption there. And we said, we need something online and we need an at-home solution. We said, cool, no problem, without batting an eyelid or figuring out, wait, how are we going to do this? But our first instinctive, that annoying entrepreneur, of course we'll do it.
You can't say no, na? That's the Indians can't say no. Remember that.
Like guilty as charged, honestly. I mean, I will find a way to get things done is the usual kind of like gung-ho spirit we all have, right? And what soon transpired was, and this was meant to be a pan-India experience, and all our courier guys were just like weeping. They were like, hey man, it's going to take you 2.5, 3 weeks to get this done. And I'm like, no, sir, I don't have that kind of time. So then basically, long story short, it involved 3 of us from the team getting tested, making sure that no one else was in the office, getting out of home, coming into office, and actually doing it on your own, like meaning your packaging, your design, collecting your, all your kind of design collateral, doing it yourself. And quite frankly, it was great fun because you get to actually understand the back-end logistics of a solution that, typically speaking, you just are responsible for marketing and selling forward. But here we actually got to understand the back-end nitty-gritties of how labor
executing it.
intensive a solution is. So, and kind of working very closely with our logistics and our courier kind of teams. And this was probably the first time I learned how things are shipped out across the country. So after that 1 week,
Your team's probably like good she had to do it once.
Yeah, for sure. That's what I'm saying. It's a complete personal boo-boo because, you know, that sense of overcommitment and saying, no, we'll do it. Don't worry about it. And kudos to the team. Quite frankly, they bailed me out. It wasn't me for sure. They bailed me out and we did deliver and we made sure that, you know, it went off smoothly because at no point, one of the actually lessons that could apply for any agencies, not to repeat my boo-boo, but if you're entrusted with part of a mandate, sometimes it's better if you almost attach yourself as an extension of your client team and you've been onboarded so that you can provide a solution that they may not have time for, not because they don't know how to do it, but because they may not have the time or the bandwidth for. And that basically also means that on behalf of your client, firefight, find solutions, figure out all potential kind of like options, action it, exhaust it before kind of like saying no or actually flagging it up as a red flag. I sometimes feel that, you know, it could be wrong advice, but I feel like as agencies, we should exhaust as many options before going to the client with that big waving red flag and say, buddy, this ain't happening. And I feel like marketing agencies who kind of take that ownership and take it as their own company problem, sometimes that goes a long way.
Yeah. I mean, you figure it out. You take sort of ownership and figure it out, basically. Yeah. So, I mean, do you have any tips for brands to take a smart approach to market when faced with a cash crunch? Like, especially in, you know, the last year where I'll be honest, I mean, when we first started sort of feeling the effects of business slowing down, your instinct is almost like, okay, where can I cut cost? And marketing comes pretty high up on that list, right? But actually, it's not that you're trying to cut marketing. You're trying to sort of stop doing the marketing piece. It's just that you're trying to find a more cost-effective way of doing it. So what would you kind of advise someone that's faced with a very small or negligible budget?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, that's almost the need
of the
hour.
First of all, you'd be like, don't come to me.
No, I feel like quite the contrary. In fact, I think the first thing, quite frankly, I mean, my pop and my brother, I mean, they're both chartered accountants. So on behalf of them, I feel like the one thing that I've learned all my life is just kind of tighten your belt, man. You know, this is the time to conserve cash. And I know that sounds, you know, quite gloomy and morbid, but this isn't a scenario that's going to change quite dramatically very soon. I think the contours of the new economy are still being developed, and we shouldn't kind of base it on the last two kind of, you know, the spikes that we saw, at least like say, I mean, around Diwali or that December to Jan kind of like spike where things opened up. Let's not rely on that. You know, that crisis opportunity is not a business model. It's not long-term. It is not sustainable. It is actually very exhausting to live working on finding that opportunity and gap in crisis markets. It's not long-term. That I would actually say the first thing is just conserve cash, because as a business community, we just need to ride it out as much as we can. The second thing would be tailor your solutions in line with your customer, even if it's your existing customer. Sometimes new customer acquisition is expensive. I get it. For us, it is as a marketing agency. And in fact, most parts of last year, we built solutions based on the new needs and asks of our existing customer base, whether that was our viewership, whether that were our clients. And we just focused on that, and that's it.
Right.
And I think it's good to be cognizant of the fact that the market has changed and it is evolving and consumer habits have changed. And why not tweak your solution in line with that? So, for example, if I may use your pizza, you know, kind of offering, again, familiarity. You're leveraging off your kind of like brand equity and trust, and comfort, familiar food. We're all seeking that right now. And the third thing would be, going back to that bit I said about, creative collaborations, that doesn't just apply to when you're kind of like looking at between brands or between creative professionals. Extend that onto PR agencies and your marketing agencies, etc. Figure out a way that, even if it means kind of like lessening the budget today, maybe extend the tenure so that there's something in it for either party. But this is also a really good time to kind of like work with like-minded professionals to figure out creative solutions to get closer to your target audience. And it's okay to have that honest conversation and collaborate instead of, just signing on or onboarding agencies. Never look at it. It is our job to be an extension of our client. They are not separate units. And I think when that sense of co-build and ownership kicks in, I think that's when magic happens. Because you're working for your brand.
You're absolutely right. Exactly. You need to, it's an extension of your team, like you said, and collaborations for sure are a way to do things. And, I've seen that happen very successfully, albeit in a small way, but it's a great way of, there's so many things that you can do without necessarily spending a lot, and which works out to be a win-win for everyone. And that's what you need to sort of think about creatively.
I agree. Yeah. Everyone is cognizant to the point that, budgets are shrunk this time, including your consumer.
Yeah. But interestingly, I want to sort of ask you about your CSR initiative, Picturewala. Why was it so important to you to focus on a CSR activity? And, has this been something that you've done from the beginning of DSSE?
So it actually started before the Supper Club. And essentially, at that point in time, I was working on a brand which was building a farm to kind of fork supply chain and removing the intermediaries in between so that the farmers get a, like bang for the buck.
Sure.
And, on my route to work, you're kind of like working off same point A to point B. And I ended up meeting, kids at the same kind of traffic signals, and they usually ask for money. And the rule at home is, give food, give clothes, give anything else. You don't know where that money is kind of like going. And quite frankly, very quickly, these kids are amazing, right? They're full of energy and they're quite giving in that love. They started sharing my morning breakfast and my evening snack back home. And during that course of kind of like exchange, I said, you get a bite of what I was eating. If you count 1 to 30, or teach me how to count 1 to 30 in Hindi, or may I teach you the English alphabet? And that 60-second traffic signal, we built our friendship. And this one time I was going down the same route, but the night hours, and almost like a nagging mom, they came up and said, "Is time pe kahan ja rahe ho?" And I said, I'm actually going to watch a movie. And they said, "Oh, great, wow, this, that, and the other." And they didn't mean it in a negative fashion at all. All they said was, "We've never seen a film." And for me, that line stayed on. And I think, and everyone around me was like, "Why don't we take some of these kids to a theater?" And I said, "I don't know, it doesn't seem right. It's also not a longer term solution. I don't want to say that, oh, by the way, this is also how entertainment is consumed. And it also almost feels like an alien universe." And so it was quite simple, Gauri. All I said was that if we can't take them to these avenues of entertainment, can we flip it and bring avenues of entertainment to their doorstep? So all I needed to do was actually rent out a projector, a screen, a verified legitimate copy of a movie, and some, snacks. And it started off again as a social experiment where, I had to really convince the parents, because the parents were like, obviously worried about their safety and like, are they being taken for another reason? Or give me $500 and then the kid can go, because that's what the kid earns in those like 60 minutes. So, there were these host of other problems that were made aware, and we recreated a movie experience for them. And post that, then we kind of like adopted a couple of low income, slum areas in Delhi and one in Maharashtra. And we started working on creative workshops for them, art, craft, movie. Oh my God, movie is a big hit because they get like, something to drink and they get cake or popcorn or whatever. And again, all of them bought from local, shops, or like, the guy on the thela, and be like, okay, come on, get popcorn out for everyone. And kind of like workshops around yoga, sport, because, they don't know the rules, right? So, and it's entirely volunteer driven.
Right.
So they come up and they have, I'm just really, really sad because, the last year and a half, we haven't had the opportunity to conduct these workshops. And we keep in touch with the kids who gave out their numbers to us. And supplies is the only way we can help at this stage. But yeah, we're excited that once things feel better, these little moments of joy, quite frankly, they become so memorable for them. Absolutely. And for us, quite frankly,
That's amazing. No, I think
that's how it started.
Yeah. And I'm really like, I love the fact that you put it up on your site, and it's something that you're very proud of. And I hope that it inspires more people to do something similar, or, just to give back, basically.
Yeah, a lot of our clients, in fact, they extended. So, they kind of like provided tickets. When we worked with Book My Show, they provided like tickets for their first kind of like, soccer league or like Premier League kind of like match.
Amazing.
Viewing.
Yeah.
And it was great fun.
That's amazing. Yeah. So, Shreya, we've entered the last segment of the show, which is just say the first thing that comes to your mind. Okay.
Got it.
What's your one comfort food? Your favorite comfort food?
Dahi chawal.
Oh God, one more person. What is it with dahi chawal? Oh, it's either khichdi or dahi chawal.
Oh man. I was born in Hyderabad and we spent like 10 years there. So for us, like, with the whole curry pata and everything. Oh my God. I'm the happiest girl when given like a cold bowl of dahi chawal.
Okay, a great book you've read in the recent past.
I want to say, can I go back to my staple favorite, which is Calvin and Hobbes? I always reach back to it. I'm also a really weird reader. I read 4 books in one time. Attention.
It's not weird at all. Yeah.
But almost every fortnight, I go back to some edition of a Calvin and Hobbes.
Yeah, it's like the Dr. Seuss, right? It's just wisdom.
They're always right. They're just always right.
The best investment you've made in your journey?
I think, and I know this sounds cheesy as hell, but just those relationships.
Yeah.
Be it work front, be it, my friends and family, just investing that a little bit more. It's a fantastic industry. I love it, which is, I don't come from this industry. So for me, it matters a little bit more that the minute they give you that level of trust, being like, cool, now roll with it. It's priceless. So I think that's been the best investment, quite frankly. Those friendships at work.
Yeah, that's true. It's amazing. Who have been your role models or mentors?
I want to say anyone and everyone, quite frankly. Sometimes you take away strange things and ticks from the strangest of people and places. Quite frankly, from my parents, I think just the ethics of how to run a business, that comes from them quite naturally. I feel like I take away a lot from the shows I watch, by the way. and I feel there's like a lot of good takeaways, even from like the weirdest kind of serial killer drama that I end up watching. A lot from my team.
Yeah.
I think like more than me, quite frankly, the way, I work with a fairly young team. A lot of them, for them, this is a first job. And just that kind of like gung-ho attitude and that no problem, you have a problem, we're going to give you an idea. It's so infectious. I love it.
I agree.
I end up learning from these way more than like probably what my business school taught me, quite frankly.
That's amazing. What would be your message to the young entrepreneurs today?
Don't give up when things turn on you. And they are going to turn, man. And quite frankly, if you keep at it, they turn back in your favor also. So just don't give up. Just breathe through it.
Amazing. Listen, that was so much fun. Thank you for being on the show.
I had such a blast.
Yeah, and I think there are lots of great takeaways for everyone, whether you're on the agency side, whether you're a new brand, or you're thinking about setting something up. And
I hope so.
Yeah, and we're waiting for you to come to Bombay. So no pressure.
Wait. I can't wait. No, for sure.
Not you come. You set up shop in Bombay.
No. Gauri, I want to tell you, Jan 20, so between December 2019 and mid-Feb 2020, I was in Bombay a lot more because we were setting up our office there.
No. Well,
and then we had to
delayed.
lug out again, and we said, you know what? Now's not the time, but we're going to come. 100%.
Great. Well, we'll look forward to that. And thank you again for making the time.
No, thank you for having me. This was great fun.
I have to admit one thing. I just had a great idea or two spring to mind while talking to Shreya that I'm going to take to my team right after I get off this recording. I hope you found the conversation equally inspiring and got some great takeaways from it, whatever stage of business you're at. If you enjoyed the episode today, tune in to some of the earlier conversations of This Round Is On Me. I hope you enjoyed tuning in today. Do catch the earlier episodes when you get a chance. And more importantly, I would love to hear from you with your thoughts on the show. You can find me on Instagram at Gauri Devidayal or on Twitter at Gauri Details or LinkedIn. Either way, sit back and relax because this round is on me.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank the sponsors on the network this week, thewholetruthfoods.com, Seat, PayPal, and Cred. We thank you all for your support. Tune in to The Note, where Maruk Inayat talks to Dr. Bipin Joshi about the second wave of COVID. He calls it no less than World War III. On The Habit Coach, Ashton was joined by Yoshita Dave, who's a sex educator and intimacy coach. On Paisa Vaisa, Anupam Gupta was joined by Amit Thakkar and Hiral Jain of Market Pulse Technologies, and they talked about trading in Indian markets. All Things Policy by the Takshashila Institute had on board Mihir Mahajan and Pranay Kotastane to talk about the recent changes in the Indian intellectual property front. You should definitely check out the Cyrus Says episode with Ace casting director Mukesh Chabra. They discussed some of his best work. We also had Ira Mukhoti, who has authored various books on history and mythology from a female gaze. The IPL season's in full swing, and we have Edges and Sledges in English and Khel Niti in Hindi if you want to check out cricket content. Really, really great conversations on both of those shows. Do check those out. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Come learn and experience the ABCDs of being queer with me, Shunetro,
and me, Farhad,
on our show Gay BCD.
The two of us take you through our stories and experiences of being gay men in the city of Mumbai and have candid
and sometimes downright scandalous
conversations about sexuality, gay culture, and everything in between.
Catch new episodes of Gay BCD every Tuesday on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get all your podcasts from.